One of the best ways to create lures with your 3D printer is to make a mold master and then pour silicone over the top of it to create a awesome open pore mold. Today we're going to take a couple of swim bait designs that I've come up with. We're going to make molds out of them with silicone and 3D printed molds. Let's go. All right, let's start out with the design. I'm not going to walk you through the whole design process with Fusion 360. I'm going to be doing a whole series of tutorial videos coming up soon on lure design and mold design with Fusion 360. So if you want to check that out, hit the subscribe button. It's coming up soon. Since I gave away all of my fishing lures recently, one of the lures that I was most concerned about replacing is the Down South Lure Burner Shad. I absolutely crushed the fish with this lure in the spring and the summertime along the Gulf Coast. It's a small 3 1/4 inch swim bait, has really great action, and I knew I needed to work on getting a replacement for that because when the fishing turns on in the spring, I'm going to be throwing that all the time. So I came up with two very similar designs. One I call the Little Butt Swim because its tail looks like a little butt, and the other one I call Burn Before Fishing, or the BBFS shad. Burn Before Fishing shad. There you go. So here is the Burn Before Fishing shad in Fusion 360, and I just basically create a floor and walls around the side so I get a complete mold master that I can pour the silicone directly into when I want to make my mold. It's just that simple. Make your lure, make as many copies as you want, and that'll make the cavities in your mold. Then just build a floor and build the walls and you're ready to go. Then we just print it out. I'm using my Sidewinder X1 for the FDM prints. It's a new FDM printer I just got. I'm gonna be posting a full review pretty soon. I like to get a good overview of the printer and how it's working. And I use the fine settings to get it as high as detail as possible. I think it came out pretty great for an FDM printer. I also decided to print out just the floor with the lures on my resin printer, my LU Saturn. I wanted to see how this compared to the FDM prints. And I didn't print out the walls here because it was kind of a waste of time. And if I'm printing out the walls on the resin printer, if I print them flat, it's gonna create a giant suction cup and it's not gonna print well. It's probably even gonna fail. So I would have to print it vertically, which would have just made my print time exceedingly long, probably in the neighborhood of 20 hours. As it is, I printed this flat on the build plate and it took roughly 2 hours, so way faster than the FDM printer even. I then went back and I printed the wall for the outside on the FDM printer so I could just snap it in place. Makes it super easy. So once you have your mold masters all printed out, the next thing you probably want to do is put a thin coat on them of either paint, epoxy, or in my case I'm going to use some poly. This is polyacrylic. I'm using it because my friend Adam said he used it with some success, and I already had some laying around in the garage, so I decided to give it a go. Ended up doing 2 separate coats, letting it dry, a few hours in between. Just follow the directions on the can, you'll be set. And it came out pretty well, right? I still have some ridges on here. I could have probably kept going with some more coats. This stuff is fairly thin, but to me at the end of the day, it really didn't matter to have a few little lines on there. I don't think the fish will care either. The resin mold just needed a few touch-ups. I got a few little holes in there, either from air bubbles or from things floating around in my vat. And to patch these up, it's really straightforward. You just take some of the resin that you're already using in your 3D printer, kind of just dab it in the hole. I use this little needle and hit it with a UV light source. In this case, I'm using a UV flashlight. And it just hardens it up just like you were in the printer, and it just kind of patches that hole right up. Next up, we're going to prep the silicone. One thing to keep in mind, if you're going to pour silicone over a resin 3D print, you want to make sure it is a tin cure silicone as opposed to a platinum cure silicone. Platinum cure silicone does not cure when it comes into contact with the resin from a 3D resin printer. It'll just end up being a big gloopy mess. So tin cure silicone all the way here. So now I need to kind of estimate how much silicone I'm going to actually need. So what I typically do is I fill up my molds with water, dump them all into a container, and I get my volume of silicone that I'm going to need. It's not an exact science. I'm sure there's some sort of difference between water volume and silicone volume. So I just always bump it up. In this case, I got 22 ounces. I'm gonna pour 24 ounces of silicone, which ended up being just about perfect. I had no leftover. I was actually probably a little tiny touch short. I'm always gonna lose a little silicone. It's gonna stick to the side of the cup. It's gonna stick to the stir stick. All kinds of things gonna happen. So I always bump it up and go on the high side. All right, now we're ready to pour. I'm gonna get my Umu 25 out. And I love this silicone for a couple of reasons. One, it's pretty forgiving on the mix. It mixes at a very simple 1-to-1 ratio by volume. And it cures pretty quickly, right? It has a pot life, I think, of 25 minutes, a cure time of 75 minutes when it's exposed to air. And it's really easy to work with. So I simply poured it in. You start in a corner, you kind of fill it up, let it roll over your masters. This helps prevent air bubbles from forming. And you also want to make sure you have a very, very thin stream coming out of your cup. That'll break up some of those bigger air bubbles as well. You could put it in a vacuum chamber. Again, this is kind of a quick and dirty mold for me. It's a prototype. I don't even know if these are going to work. So I'm not too hung up on air at this point. So after a couple hours, I go to demold them. The top that's exposed to the air is nice and firm, but the underside is still very, very soft. The mold is really, really airtight, so not a lot of air is penetrating here. So you just want to kind of be careful when you're demolding here to make sure you don't add too much stress and get too much deformation in your molds. So I pop it out. I kind of bend one a little bit too much and end up getting a tail a little bit wider than another one. And I let them cure again. The package says 4 hours. At this point, it's about 9 o'clock at night. I just leave them overnight and I come back the next morning and they are good to go. Nice and solid, very tight, no issues whatsoever with my molds. Super stoked. All right, so now one of my big idiot moves, I make a lot of big idiot moves, but this one, I decided to try to do a 3-color pour immediately out of the bat after never pouring these molds before. And I'm gonna try to replicate the chicken of the sea color. So first thing I do is I pour my chartreuse. I just go ahead and pour the whole mold chartreuse. I come back in and I clip the tails off and demold the bodies. So far it's looking pretty good, not too bad. Then I come in with my bottom layer. So on the DSL, it looks like this bottom layer is clear plastic with a ton of silver flake in it. I decided to go with what I call Disco Monkey, which is interference violet, black flake, 1 drop of black. You could use white here and it would actually brighten it up a little bit. In this case, I went black and it kind of darkens it up a little bit. Gets a little more purple coming out. Disco holographic flake. All those things together do my cake on monkey's milk, which I call Disco Monkey because it has a hol flake in it. It's like a disco, bro. I get that poured in for the bellies. At this point, I'm not feeling very good because I'm heating up my top color and it's taking a long time. I have one really small microwave that takes about 3.5 minutes to heat up even 6 ounces of plastic. So my top coat's gonna be some Pearl-Ex green mica powder, some dark melon dead on plastics color, and some red flake, and a little bit of black to darken it up. So let's take a look at the results. I think they came out really pretty good. You can see a little bit of artifacting from the 3D print, a few lines here and there. But overall, I'm super happy with the way the mold came out. Unfortunately, when I went to go actually test these lures, they swim like absolute garbage. Especially the little butt lure there. I think its body is way too big. When I go to swim it, it actually just kind of twirls like this. Looks like garbage. So I'm back to the drawing board on that one. The BBF, Burn Before Fishing Shad, that's a terrible name. BBFS, it was okay. I think my body is still a little small. It was, when I put it on the jig head I was using, it actually kind of blew up really big, and the tail just doesn't have a lot of great action that I'm looking for. So I think that one is closer to saving than the little butt swim. So I'm gonna do a few more revisions of that. And the other thing I learned during this process is I shouldn't have printed a 5-6 cavity mold at this point when I don't even know the lures are working. So I've gone back to the drawing board on the BBFS, and I'm going to print a single cavity mold for my next revision of this. Pour it, see if it works, And if it does, then I'll expand it out to a 6-cavity mold. But there's no reason to make a 6-cavity mold of a lure you don't even know. So stay tuned. I'll continue to revise the BBFS. We'll show you the next version in a video coming out shortly. And again, if you want these models, as soon as I have them perfected, I'm going to be releasing them to my mailing list. You can click that link below to join my mailing list and get these for free. If you found this video at all useful, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys again soon. Tight lines.